All right, let's dive into a really big idea. Back in 1904, Sir Helford Mackinder, one of the founders of the London School of Economics, gave this incredible address. He was trying to do something huge, find a kind of formula, a geographical key that could unlock the entire sweep of world history and maybe even give us a peek into the future. And he kicks things off with this bombshell of a quote. What he's saying is, for the first time in human history, the game has changed. The 400-year Columbian epoch, this era of endless exploration and discovery, was over. The map was full. There was no new world left to find. And that created a totally new situation, a closed political system. Think about it. Before, a war or a revolution could happen and its effects would just kind of fade out into the unknown. But now, in this new, closed world, every major event sends a shockwave that reverberates across the entire globe, affecting everyone. There's nowhere left for the impact to just disappear.
So, if we're all stuck together on this one single stage, how do we make sense of it all? Well, Mackinder said we need to completely flip our perspective on history. He asks us to stop looking at the world from Europe outwards, and instead to look at Europe from the vast heart of Asia.
And this is his really radical idea. He argued that European civilization wasn't some kind of homegrown miracle. Nope. He said its very identity, its nations, its entire existence was actually forged by centuries of having to react to immense, constant pressure from invaders pouring out of the East.
And he backs this up with some pretty powerful examples. The invasion of the Huns, it pushed people into the lagoons, leading to the founding of Venice. The threat of Attila was so great it forced the Franks and Goths to team up, laying the groundwork for what we now call France. Austria was literally born as a military buffer state. He even argues the whole idea of Christendom was really solidified by the need to unite against outside forces.
So, this all leads to the core of his theory. If all this pressure from the East was so important, you have to ask, where exactly was it all coming from?
This is the million-dollar question that his whole talk is built around. If this massive land power was the real engine of history, where was its home base? Where was the geographical pivot that the entire world seemed to turn on?
And this is his answer. He basically redraws the world map into 3 distinct zones. Right at the center is the pivot area, what he'd later call the heartland. Wrapped around that is an inner crescent of great civilizations, Europe, India, China. And then, on the very outside, you have the outer crescent of sea powers, like Britain, Japan, and the America.
Now, what made this pivot area so unique was its geography. It was a natural fortress. You see, its huge rivers, the Volga, the Lena, they don't flow out into the open ocean where ships can sail up them. No, they drain into the frozen Arctic or into landlocked seas. This meant that sea power, which was Europe's trump card, was totally useless here. You just couldn't get in.
And this geographical fact, Mackinder argued, sets up the fundamental conflict of all human history. It's a massive, centuries-long struggle between 2 different kinds of power, 2 different kinds of mobility, the land power of the horsemen from the pivot and the sea power of the shipmen from the crescents. For more than 1,000 years, land power was absolutely dominant. It was just this relentless wave of horse-riding people coming out of the pivot area. The Huns, the Avars, the Mongols, they could strike anywhere, deep into Europe, China, or India, and completely change the course of history for everyone they met.
So you can really see the 2 systems here, side by side. The horsemen had the vast open steppe, basically an ocean of grass, that let them project power deep into continents. The shipmen had the actual ocean, which let them dominate the world's coastlines. For centuries, these 2 forces were in a kind of epic strategic deadlock.
But then, that age of exploration, the Columbian epoch, completely changed the game. Mackinder saw this as a temporary but decisive victory for sea power. For the first time, European ships could sail all the way around the great Eurasian landmass. They could use the ocean to outflank the heartland powers, essentially surrounding them. But, and this is a huge but, right at the moment he was speaking, in 1904, Mackinder saw a new technology that was about to turn the tables all over again. A technology that could make the heartland more powerful than ever before. And that technology was the railway.
So in Mackinder's eyes, the master of the heartland had changed.
The nomadic hordes were history. In their place stood the Russian Empire, which had done something no one had ever done before. It had organized and taken control of the entire pivot area, inheriting all of its incredible strategic potential. And this number, 6,000, that represents Russia's new weapon. The 6,000 miles of the Trans-Siberian Railway. This network of steel was a whole new kind of mobility. It meant armies and resources could now cross that vast steppe, that ocean of grass, with a speed that finally challenged the ship. The horse had been replaced.
Mackinder then laid out this chillingly logical progression. You start with Russia organizing the pivot area, then you add railways that erase the problem of distance. Suddenly, all the heartland's massive resources, its grain, its fuel, its metals, can be unlocked and used. And that, he warned, creates the potential for a massive land-based empire that could finally challenge the sea powers and make a bid for world domination.
So you'd think after a bombshell like that, everyone would just be stunned into silence, right? Not a chance. The debate that kicked off the second he stopped talking was almost as interesting as the theory itself.
His peers immediately started poking holes in the argument. A military critic named Spencer Wilkinson stood up and said, "Hang on, agile sea powers like Britain and a rising Japan can always work together to create a balance of power against any single giant." But then, a politician named L.S. Amory made an even more shocking prediction.
You have to hear this. In 1904, just months after the Wright brothers' very first flight, Emery says that in the future, both ships and trains are going to be supplemented by air power. And when that happens, he said, what will really matter isn't geography, it'll be industrial power. It'll be who can invent and build the best machines. I mean, what an incredible piece of foresight.
So when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway? Mackinder's heartland theory gave the world this powerful new lens for looking at history. He framed it not just as a random series of kings and battles, but as this epic, ongoing struggle between the power that controls the great continent and the powers that control the seas. And that leaves us with the big question today, doesn't it? Over 100 years later, in a world of satellites and the internet, who do you think was right? Does the raw geography of the heartland still hold the key to world power? Or was Amory right? The technology, industry, and maybe now control of the skies and cyberspace have finally made that old map obsolete.